The easiest mistake a leader can make is believing that the quietest person in the room has the least to offer. The towering glass headquarters of Horizon Dynamics reflected the first light of a crisp Seattle morning as employees gathered in the expansive marble lobby, whispering about the arrival of their newly appointed chief executive officer. Television screens displayed welcome messages while executives in tailored suits exchanged confident handshakes. Department managers reviewed schedules, and security staff prepared for the company's first leadership meeting under its new direction. Standing quietly near a maintenance cart was Ethan Walker, a 43-year-old single father whose simple gray work shirt and company identification badge caused him to blend into the background. He carried a small toolbox polished from years of careful use, greeting every employee with the same respectful smile regardless of title or position. Before beginning his morning inspection, Ethan glanced at a handwritten note tucked inside his lunch bag. His 10-year-old daughter Lily had decorated the paper with tiny blue stars beside the words, "Have a wonderful day, Dad." Ethan smiled softly before folding it back into his pocket, whispering, "Everything good I build begins with you." Moments later, the lobby grew silent as Victoria Brooks entered through the revolving doors surrounded by board members, legal advisors, and senior executives. Dressed in an elegant navy business suit with calm confidence, she walked through the building studying every detail with the sharp eyes of someone determined to reshape the company immediately. She believed efficiency demanded difficult decisions, and she intended to make them without hesitation. As she crossed the lobby, her attention settled briefly on Ethan organizing maintenance supplies near the reception desk. She turned toward the director of operations and quietly asked, "Why are we still employing maintenance personnel full-time for tasks that can easily be outsourced?" The director hesitated before answering. "Mr. Walker has been with the company for many years." Victoria barely looked at the personnel file handed to her. "Longevity is not the same as value," she replied firmly. "We are building the future, not preserving sentiment." Several nearby employees lowered their eyes, sensing the uncomfortable direction of the conversation. Victoria walked directly toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker?" Ethan looked up with his usual calm expression. "Good morning, ma'am." Victoria folded the file closed. "Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated. Human Resources will provide your final paperwork today." A wave of silence spread through the lobby. Receptionists paused their work. Engineers stopped walking. Even the security officers exchanged uncertain glances. Ethan remained completely composed. "May I ask if there was a performance concern?" he said respectfully. Victoria answered without emotion. "No. Your role simply no longer fits the company's future." Ethan nodded once, accepting the decision without argument. "I understand." He carefully removed his company identification badge, placed it beside the neatly organized toolbox, and thanked the receptionist for always greeting him with kindness every morning. Before leaving, he smiled politely at the maintenance team standing nearby. "Take good care of one another," he said quietly. No bitterness entered his voice. No complaint escaped his lips. He simply picked up his lunch bag, touched the note Lily had written earlier that morning, and walked slowly toward the lobby doors beneath the watchful eyes of hundreds of employees. Victoria observed him leave with complete certainty that she had made the correct business decision. None of them knew that the quiet man disappearing through those glass doors had once laid the invisible foundation upon which the entire company still stood. Ethan Walker stepped out of the Horizon Dynamics headquarters carrying nothing except his lunch bag, his weathered toolbox, and the quiet dignity that no termination notice could ever take away. Rain clouds drifted gently across the Seattle sky as he walked toward an older pickup truck parked several blocks from the office, placing the carefully folded note from Lily back into his pocket before starting the engine. He did not call former coworkers to complain. He did not question the decision. Instead, he drove directly to the elementary school where his 10-year-old daughter waited every afternoon beneath the same maple tree near the front entrance. The moment Lily spotted the familiar truck, she smiled brightly and hurried toward him carrying a backpack nearly half her size. "How was your day, Dad?" she asked cheerfully. Ethan smiled with the same warmth she had always known. "Different than I expected," he answered honestly. Lily studied his face for a moment. "Something happened." Ethan nodded gently. "Yes. I finished my last day at work." Lily looked surprised, but never frightened. Are we going to be all right? Ethan reached across the seat and squeezed her hand. We have each other. That means we already have the most important thing. Lily smiled quietly before beginning to tell him about a science project she had completed at school. Ethan listened carefully, asking questions, laughing at her stories, and refusing to let the weight of the morning steal the joy of the afternoon. When they arrived home, their small house reflected the simple life they had built together after losing Lily's mother several years earlier. Family photographs lined the hallway. Fresh herbs grew beside the kitchen window. A bicycle leaned against the porch railing waiting for another weekend ride. Ethan prepared homemade vegetable soup while Lily completed her homework at the dining table. Every few minutes, she looked toward her father, noticing that although he remained calm, his thoughts occasionally drifted somewhere far away. After dinner, she disappeared into the garage, searching for colored paper. When she returned, she proudly handed him a homemade sign that read, "You can build anything." Ethan smiled as emotion briefly filled his eyes. Why did you make this? Lily shrugged with the innocent confidence only a child could possess. Because if someone stops believing in you, it does not mean they are right. Ethan hugged her tightly. Your mom would be very proud of you. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan quietly entered a small workshop connected to the garage. Shelves held carefully labeled notebooks, engineering manuals, circuit boards, and neatly rolled architectural drawings protected inside weathered storage tubes. He opened one drawer and removed several large blueprints covered with handwritten notes dating back more than 15 years. The pages illustrated the original system architecture for Horizon Dynamics, complete with detailed diagrams, handwritten calculations, and signatures from the company's earliest development meetings. Ethan gently traced one faded signature with his fingertips before carefully rolling the documents closed again. He never displayed them to impress anyone. They simply represented a chapter of life he had quietly placed behind him after choosing family over recognition. Across the city, inside Horizon Dynamics headquarters, Victoria Brooks completed her first executive strategy meeting with confidence. She announced ambitious modernization plans, aggressive restructuring goals, and accelerated technology initiatives that received enthusiastic approval from the board of directors. As employees returned to their offices, no one noticed a series of small technical alerts quietly appearing across internal monitoring screens. Engineers dismissed them as routine maintenance notifications, unaware that the invisible foundation supporting nearly every critical system had just lost the one person who understood every decision hidden beneath years of upgrades, revisions, and expansion. 3 days after Ethan Walker quietly left Horizon Dynamics, the atmosphere inside the headquarters changed in ways no executive had expected. It began with small irregularities that seemed almost insignificant. Internal reporting dashboards refreshed more slowly than usual. Automated scheduling systems occasionally failed to synchronize between departments. A handful of engineers noticed warning messages inside the infrastructure logs, but every diagnostic tool insisted the network remained healthy. During the morning executive briefing, Victoria Brooks confidently presented the first phase of her modernization strategy, while investors applauded ambitious projections for the coming year. She spoke about efficiency, innovation, and preparing the company for the future. As the meeting ended, the chief technology officer entered the conference room carrying a tablet with an unusually serious expression. We have encountered several unexpected system inconsistencies, he explained. Nothing critical yet, but the engineering teams are investigating. Victoria remained calm. Handle it internally. I do not want unnecessary concern distracting the organization. Throughout the afternoon, additional alerts quietly appeared across multiple departments. Customer support representatives reported delays retrieving account histories. Manufacturing planners noticed synchronization errors between inventory databases. Software engineers examined thousands of lines of source code, only to discover that many of the most important architectural decisions had never been fully documented. Every answer seemed to point toward another unanswered question. One senior engineer leaned back from his workstation and sighed. Who designed this original infrastructure? Another engineer searched through archived documentation before shaking her head. The earliest records are incomplete. Every major revision references an earlier foundation, but nobody explains why it was built this way. Hours passed as increasingly experienced specialists attempted to trace the system logic. The deeper they searched, the more impressed they became by its remarkable design. Redundant safety layers, intelligent recovery sequences, and elegant performance optimizations had quietly protected the company for years without attracting attention. Whoever created this understood problems people would not discover until a decade later, one engineer whispered. This is extraordinary work. Meanwhile, Ethan spent the afternoon helping Lily assemble a model bridge for her science class. They measured wooden craft sticks across the kitchen table, testing different support designs while Lily asked endless questions about balance and engineering. Ethan patiently explained how strong foundations often remain invisible because people naturally notice what stands above them instead. Lily smiled thoughtfully. So the best builders are sometimes the hardest to see. Ethan nodded. Exactly. If the foundation is doing its job, everyone forgets it is even there. Back at Horizon Dynamics, the engineering teams worked late into the evening. Coffee cups collected across conference tables, while digital diagrams covered every display screen. Despite countless hours of analysis, no one could confidently explain why certain systems behaved exactly as they did. Shortly before midnight, the chief technology officer requested access to archived company records dating back to the earliest years of Horizon Dynamics. We are missing part of the story, he said quietly. Someone built this company long before any of us arrived, and we need to understand what they were thinking. Deep inside the company's secure records department, an archivist unlocked a climate-controlled storage room filled with carefully preserved boxes, engineering journals, handwritten notebooks, and historical design files untouched for years. As she pulled one weathered archive from the highest shelf, a faded label caught her attention. Original core infrastructure. Lead systems architect, Ethan Walker. At that exact moment, across town, Ethan switched off the workshop lights, wished Lily good night, and quietly closed the garage door, completely unaware that the company he had left behind had just begun uncovering the truth hidden beneath its own foundation. The following morning, Horizon Dynamics no longer felt like the confident company Victoria Brooks had proudly addressed only days earlier. Every conference room displayed system diagrams, engineers spoke in hushed voices, and department leaders postponed important client presentations while technical teams searched desperately for answers hidden somewhere inside the company's oldest infrastructure. Victoria entered the executive conference room expecting another progress report. Instead, the chief technology officer quietly placed a thick archive binder on the polished wooden table. Before we discuss the systems, he said carefully, there is something you need to see. Victoria opened the binder and immediately noticed faded engineering sketches, handwritten architectural notes, and photographs taken during the earliest years of Horizon Dynamics. One photograph captured a small group of young engineers standing inside an unfinished office surrounded by cables, servers, and whiteboards filled with handwritten calculations. Standing at the center of the group was a younger Ethan Walker. Victoria looked up in disbelief. That cannot be the same maintenance employee. The archivist gently slid another document across the table. It is, she replied. Mr. Walker was the original lead systems architect. He designed the core infrastructure that still powers nearly every critical operation inside this company. Silence settled across the room. The chief technology officer opened another folder containing technical journals written entirely in Ethan's careful handwriting. Every page documented not only how the systems had been built, but why each decision had been made. Redundant safety layers, recovery protocols, long-term scalability, and maintenance principles stretched across thousands of detailed notes. He was planning for problems that had not even existed when these systems were created, one senior engineer said quietly. We have been benefiting from his work for more than 15 years. Victoria slowly turned another page and discovered the original company charter signed by the founding leadership team. Ethan's signature appeared beside theirs, listed as both founding systems architect and founding technical partner. She stared at the document, remembering the calm man she had dismissed in front of hundreds of employees only days earlier. If he helped build everything, she asked softly, why was he working in maintenance? The director of human resources answered with visible regret. After his wife passed away, he requested a quieter position. He said he needed predictable hours so he could raise his daughter. He voluntarily stepped away from executive responsibilities, transferred his leadership duties to younger engineers, and asked only to remain close enough to help whenever the company needed him. Victoria lowered her eyes. Every confident assumption she had made during her first day now felt painfully incomplete. She remembered telling him that his role no longer fit the company's future, never realizing he had helped create its entire foundation. The chief technology officer continued speaking. Many of the systems we are struggling to understand were intentionally designed only to be modified by engineers who fully understood the philosophy behind them. The documentation explains everything, but it assumes readers share the same design principles. Most of us never learned directly from him. Victoria quietly closed the binder and walked alone into the executive hallway overlooking the Seattle skyline. Rain gently tapped against the tall glass windows as employees hurried below, unaware that the company's history had just been rewritten inside one conference room. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she no longer thought about quarterly reports or shareholder expectations. She thought about one quiet father carrying a lunch bag with his daughter's handwritten note inside, thanking coworkers before leaving without resentment after being dismissed from the very company he had helped build. Standing beside the rain-covered window, Victoria finally whispered the words she wished she had spoken days earlier. "I made a terrible mistake." Early the next afternoon, Victoria Brooks parked her car in front of a modest white house on a quiet street lined with maple trees just outside Seattle. The address from Ethan Walker's personnel file had led her there, but the confidence she usually carried into every boardroom seemed to disappear before she even stepped onto the front porch. Children's laughter drifted through an open kitchen window while the gentle smell of fresh bread filled the cool afternoon air. She hesitated for a brief moment before knocking softly. A few seconds later, the front door opened, and Ethan stood there wearing a simple blue flannel shirt instead of his former company uniform. His expression remained calm, carrying the same quiet kindness she remembered from the company lobby. "Good afternoon," he said warmly. "Good afternoon," Victoria replied, lowering her eyes. "I hope I am not interrupting." Ethan stepped aside politely. "Please come in." The house reflected the life of a devoted father rather than a celebrated engineer. Family photographs filled the walls, shelves held well-used books about science and history, and colorful school projects decorated one corner of the living room. Lily looked up from the dining table, where she was finishing homework, before smiling politely. "Hello." Victoria smiled back. "Hello, Lily." Ethan invited Victoria to sit while he poured 2 cups of coffee. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Victoria took a slow breath. "I came here to apologize," she said honestly. "Not because our systems are struggling, but because I judged your value before I understood who you were." Ethan listened without interrupting. "I looked at your job title instead of your character," she continued. "I believed leadership meant making fast decisions. Instead, I made an uninformed one." Ethan smiled gently. "Everyone makes decisions with the information they have." Victoria shook her head. "I had enough information to treat you with respect. I simply failed to do it." Silence settled comfortably between them. Lily quietly gathered her school books and excused herself to the backyard, sensing the adults needed privacy. Victoria looked around the room and noticed several framed photographs from Horizon Dynamics' earliest years. In one picture, a much younger Ethan stood beside a small group of engineers inside an unfinished office, smiling proudly as they assembled the company's very first server racks. "Why did you never tell anyone?" she asked softly. Ethan followed her gaze toward the photograph. "Because the company was never supposed to belong to one person. It belonged to everyone willing to build something meaningful together." Victoria looked at him with genuine curiosity. "Then why leave engineering?" Ethan folded his hands calmly. "After my wife passed away, Lily needed her father more than Horizon Dynamics needed another executive. Positions can be replaced. Childhood cannot." Victoria felt the weight of those words settle deeply inside her heart. She had spent years pursuing growth, acquisitions, and shareholder value, yet she suddenly realized that Ethan had measured success using an entirely different standard. "The engineers cannot fully understand the original infrastructure," she admitted quietly. Ethan nodded. "That is understandable. The systems were designed around principles, not shortcuts. If someone only learns the code without learning the philosophy behind it, the architecture eventually becomes difficult to maintain." Victoria looked at him hopefully. Would you consider returning to help us? Ethan smiled kindly before answering. I will always help people who genuinely want to learn. But I am not interested in reclaiming titles or offices. My priority will always be Lily. Victoria nodded with complete understanding. Then perhaps we have been trying to rebuild the company the wrong way. Maybe what we really need is not another executive. Maybe we need the teacher who quietly built its foundation. Ethan glanced toward the backyard where Lily laughed while watering flowers beneath the afternoon sun. Strong foundations are not built to be admired, he said softly. They are built so others can safely stand upon them. The following Monday morning, Ethan Walker walked back through the glass entrance of Horizon Dynamics, carrying the same weathered toolbox he had carried for years. Nothing about his appearance suggested he had once helped build one of the country's most respected technology companies. He wore a simple blue button-down shirt, greeted the security officers by name, and smiled warmly at the reception staff exactly as he always had. This time, however, the atmosphere inside the lobby felt entirely different. Employees quietly stopped their conversations as they watched him enter. Word had already spread throughout the company that the quiet maintenance employee everyone had overlooked had actually designed the original foundation supporting nearly every critical system. Victoria Brooks met Ethan personally at the entrance. Instead of standing above him as she had on her first day, she extended her hand with genuine respect. Thank you for coming back, she said sincerely. Ethan shook her hand gently. I came back because people need help, not because I need a title. Together they entered the Executive Technology Center, where dozens of engineers had spent days trying to understand the increasingly complex infrastructure. Whiteboards filled with diagrams covered the walls, monitors displayed performance data, and exhausted team members looked up as Ethan quietly entered the room. No one applauded. The silence itself reflected something far more meaningful. It was the silence of respect replacing assumption. Ethan walked toward the central system diagram and studied it for several moments without speaking. Finally, he picked up a marker and drew a single line connecting two sections of the architecture. You are looking at the system as separate departments, he explained calmly. It was never designed that way. It behaves like one living structure. Every decision here affects something somewhere else. The engineers immediately leaned forward. Questions filled the room. Yet Ethan answered each one patiently, without making anyone feel embarrassed for not knowing the history behind the design. Rather than taking control himself, he invited younger engineers to solve each challenge while guiding them toward the underlying principles that shaped every decision. Never memorize solutions, he reminded them. Understand the reason behind them. Technology changes. Good principles do not. Throughout the afternoon, the atmosphere slowly transformed from frustration into confidence. Long-standing system inconsistencies disappeared one by one as engineers finally understood how the original architecture had been intended to evolve. The chief technology officer quietly watched the team work together before turning toward Victoria. He is not simply fixing systems, he whispered. He is teaching people how to think. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. She realized that leadership did not always sound like inspiring speeches or dramatic decisions. Sometimes it looked like one patient teacher helping others become stronger than they believed possible. Late that afternoon, the company's largest client called requesting confirmation that the recent technical concerns had been fully resolved before approving a long-term partnership renewal. Instead of answering personally, Victoria invited the engineering team to present their work. Ethan remained seated quietly near the back of the room, smiling as younger engineers confidently explained both the solutions and the philosophy they had learned together that day. When the meeting concluded successfully, the room filled with relieved smiles rather than celebration. Ethan quietly packed his notebook and prepared to leave. Victoria stopped him near the elevator. The board wants to restore your executive position immediately, she said. Ethan smiled gratefully, but gently declined. I appreciate the offer, but my daughter is waiting for me at home. That has always been my most important responsibility. Victoria watched him walk toward the parking lot carrying the same worn toolbox with which he had arrived that morning. She finally understood that greatness had never been hidden inside a corner office. It had been quietly walking through the hallways every day, asking for nothing except the opportunity to help others build something that would outlast them all. Over the following weeks, Horizon Dynamics began changing in ways that reached far beyond its technology. The company's systems operated more smoothly than ever, but the greatest transformation happened inside the people who walked through the headquarters every morning. Engineers who had once competed for recognition now gathered around whiteboards to solve problems together. Junior employees felt comfortable asking questions without fearing embarrassment because Ethan Walker answered every question with patience instead of pride. He never reminded anyone that he had built the original architecture. Instead, he celebrated every breakthrough achieved by someone else. Victoria Brooks watched these quiet moments more carefully than any financial report. One afternoon, she stood outside a conference room as Ethan guided a group of newly hired engineers through the philosophy behind resilient design. Technology is temporary, he explained calmly. Character is permanent. Build systems the same way you build trust. Make them dependable even when nobody notices. The room remained silent as every engineer wrote down his words. After the session ended, several employees stayed behind simply to thank him. Ethan smiled politely, wished them success, and quietly returned borrowed markers to their proper place before heading toward the parking lot to pick up Lily from school. Nothing about his routine suggested he had become the most respected person inside the company. That evening, Victoria called an unscheduled meeting of the board of directors. Every executive gathered around the polished conference table, expecting another discussion about quarterly performance. Instead, Victoria projected one photograph onto the large presentation screen. It showed a much younger Ethan standing beside the original development team during the earliest days of Horizon Dynamics. This company has celebrated products, profits, and expansion, she began quietly. But we failed to honor one of the people who made all of those achievements possible. The room grew completely still. Victoria admitted her own mistake without excuses. On my first day, I judged an extraordinary man by his job title. I believed I was removing an unnecessary employee. In reality, I dismissed one of the architects of everything we now depend upon. No one interrupted her. The board members listened carefully as she described Ethan's decision to leave executive leadership years earlier after losing his wife, so he could devote his life to raising Lily. Several directors lowered their eyes, realizing they had walked past him for years without ever asking about his story. Victoria placed a new proposal before the board. I recommend establishing the Ethan Walker Engineering Fellowship, a mentorship program that preserves not only technical excellence, but also humility, integrity, and servant leadership for every future generation of engineers. Every vote in the room supported the proposal without hesitation. The following morning, Victoria personally invited Ethan into the executive conference room. She explained the fellowship and showed him the draft announcement. Ethan read every page quietly before looking up with a gentle smile. "The idea is generous," he said. "But if you truly want to honor me, remove my name." Victoria looked surprised. Ethan continued softly. "Call it the Foundation Fellowship instead. Foundations exist to support others, not to receive attention." Victoria smiled as emotion filled her eyes. "You keep teaching us even when you do not realize it." Ethan folded the proposal and handed it back. "Then promise me one thing." "Anything," Victoria answered. Ethan looked toward the engineering floor visible through the glass wall. "Make sure every new employee feels seen before they feel evaluated. People do their best work when they know they matter." Victoria nodded slowly. At that moment, she understood that the most valuable legacy Ethan had ever created was not hidden inside software, blueprints, or technical documentation. It lived inside every person willing to choose respect before judgment, service before recognition, and quiet dignity before personal success. 1 month later, every employee at Horizon Dynamics received an invitation marked mandatory company gathering. No agenda accompanied the message, and curiosity spread through every department as engineers, designers, accountants, interns, executives, and support staff filled the main auditorium overlooking the Seattle skyline. The stage remained simple. There were no elaborate decorations, no dramatic music, and no promotional videos. Victoria Brooks stepped to the podium wearing the same quiet professionalism that had gradually replaced the confidence she once believed was leadership. She waited until the room settled into complete silence before speaking. "Today is not about announcing a new product or celebrating financial success," she began calmly. Today is about correcting a mistake that should never have happened. Hundreds of employees listened attentively as Victoria described her first morning inside the company. She openly admitted that she had judged one man by a uniform instead of his character and by a job title instead of his contribution. She accepted full responsibility without attempting to soften the truth. Leadership requires accountability, she continued. If I expect honesty from everyone else, I must begin with my own. She then invited Ethan Walker to join her on stage. Ethan hesitated briefly before walking forward wearing the same simple blue button-down shirt he always preferred. As he reached the stage, something remarkable happened without anyone being instructed. One employee stood, then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The applause continued, not because Ethan demanded recognition, but because everyone finally understood the quiet story that had always existed beside them. Ethan smiled modestly and waited patiently until the room became quiet again. Victoria turned toward him. I publicly dismissed you before understanding your story, she said sincerely. Today I would like to publicly thank you for building more than this company. You built a culture that many of us forgot how to protect. She presented Ethan with a framed copy of the original company charter bearing his signature alongside the founders, carefully restored by the corporate archives team. Ethan accepted it with gratitude before placing it gently on the podium instead of holding it high. This document belongs to everyone here, he said softly. Buildings grow because many hands contribute. No single person deserves all the credit. The audience listened as though every word carried the weight of years. Victoria then announced a new company tradition. Every employee, regardless of position, would spend part of orientation learning the history, values, and servant leadership principles upon which Horizon Dynamics had been founded. Promotions would measure mentorship and character alongside technical performance. The auditorium responded with warm applause, but Ethan quietly raised one hand. May I add one thought? He asked. Victoria nodded immediately. Ethan looked across the room, filled with faces from every department. Never assume the quietest person knows the least, he said. Some people carry extraordinary experience without ever mentioning it. Others carry invisible burdens while still choosing kindness every day. Respect should never depend on someone's title. Complete silence followed his words. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the peaceful silence that arrives when truth settles into every heart at the same time. As employees slowly left the auditorium, conversations sounded different than before. Managers greeted custodians by name. Executives thanked receptionists. Engineers introduced themselves to interns with genuine interest. Standing near the back of the room, Victoria watched those simple moments unfold and realized that the greatest transformation inside Horizon Dynamics had never been technological. It had begun the day one humble father chose dignity instead of resentment, quietly teaching an entire company what leadership truly looked like. 1 year passed quietly, and Horizon Dynamics became known throughout the technology industry not only for innovation, but also for something far more difficult to measure. People spoke about its culture with genuine admiration. New employees often remarked that everyone, from interns to executives, treated one another with the same respect. Visitors noticed managers thanking custodians, engineers listening patiently to junior developers, and leaders taking time to learn the names of receptionists and security officers. Few outsiders understood how those small moments had become part of the company's identity, but everyone inside the building knew exactly where the change had begun. Ethan Walker never accepted an executive office, a reserved parking space, or a prestigious title. Instead, he served as a part-time technical advisor several mornings each week, always leaving the office before the afternoon so he could meet Lily after school. His old toolbox still rested beside his desk, even though most days he opened notebooks instead of equipment. Whenever young engineers asked why he refused promotions, Ethan simply smiled. Success means very little if the people who need you most cannot find you when they come home. Lily was now preparing for middle school and had developed a growing love for mathematics and engineering. Some afternoons, she visited Horizon Dynamics after school, quietly sitting in the innovation lab while finishing homework. Employees smiled whenever she arrived because Ethan never introduced her as his daughter with pride alone. He introduced her as the reason he had learned what truly mattered. Victoria Brooks also changed in ways no leadership seminar could have accomplished. Before making important decisions, she walked through different departments, speaking with employees whose names had once been hidden beneath job titles. She listened more than she spoke. During every orientation for new hires, she personally shared the story of a quiet father who reminded an entire company that character always outlasts status. She never mentioned the story to protect her own reputation. She shared it because she wanted every future leader to avoid repeating her mistake. On a warm spring afternoon, Horizon Dynamics dedicated a simple stone monument beside the entrance garden. It carried no portrait and no corporate slogan. Carved into the polished granite were only a few carefully chosen words. Strong foundations are built so others may rise. Ethan stood quietly beside Lily as employees gathered around the memorial. Victoria invited him to speak, but he gently declined. The message already says everything that needs to be remembered, he replied with his familiar smile. As families enjoyed the company picnic that followed, Lily looked at her father and asked a question she had been saving for months. Dad, are you happy everything turned out this way? Ethan watched children laughing across the lawn while coworkers from every department shared meals together without caring about titles or offices. He nodded thoughtfully. I never wanted people to remember what I built, he answered softly. I hoped they would remember how they treated one another after I was gone. Lily slipped her hand into his and smiled. Victoria quietly overheard those words from a short distance away. She looked toward the headquarters rising behind the garden and finally understood that companies are never remembered only because of the products they create or the profits they earn. They are remembered because ordinary people choose kindness when no one is watching, humility when recognition is offered, and dignity when life feels unfair. As the afternoon sunlight settled across the campus, Ethan and Lily walked slowly toward the parking lot together, leaving the celebration behind with the same quiet grace that had defined every chapter of their journey. The applause eventually faded, the conversations gradually ended, and the building returned to silence. But the foundation one humble father had built inside countless hearts would remain long after every name on every office door had changed.